The lake was so still that morning that every cast of my fishing line felt like dropping a pebble into glass. Mist hovered low over the water, soft and pale, curling around the edges of my small, aluminum boat. I had come here for quiet. No roads nearby, no cabins, nothing but the distant rush of wind through the pines. For the first hour, it was exactly that. Then the silence changed. A faint disturbance rippled across the mirror-flat surface. At first I thought it was a beaver or maybe a pair of ducks, but the shapes kept growing, rising, taking form through the fog. My pulse thumped once, hard, when I finally recognized what I was seeing. Wolves. Several of them. Swimming straight toward me. For a moment I sat frozen, knuckles whitening around the handle of my rod. Wolves didn't swim this far out. Not unless they were chasing something, or worse, chasing me. I dropped the rod and grabbed the paddle, holding it like a clumsy shield as the shapes cut through the water with slow, uneven strokes. The mist thinned just enough for me to count them. 1, 2, 7. A whole pack. Their heads barely rose above the surface, ears flattened, muzzles dipping as if each breath was a struggle. My mind ran through every worst-case scenario. If they reached the boat, if they tried to climb in, what could I do? The paddle shook in my hands. I pushed myself to my feet, ready to shout, ready to swing if I had to. But when the first wolf drifted close enough for me to see its eyes, everything inside me shifted. There was no aggression, no growl, just exhaustion, raw, heavy exhaustion. The wolf's stroke slowed, its body tilting sideways before it corrected itself. It wasn't attacking. It was barely staying afloat. Another wolf surfaced behind it, coughing water, legs thrashing weakly beneath it. A third bumped into the first, both of them struggling to keep momentum. They weren't coming at me. They were escaping something. The nearest wolf reached my boat and pressed its shoulder against the metal hull, not with force, but like a drowning person reaching for anything solid. The boat rocked, and I stumbled backward, heart pounding, but the wolf made no attempt to climb in. It only leaned, trembling. I lowered the paddle slightly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then, from the forested shore, a sharp crack tore through the air. A gunshot. The echo rolled across the lake like thunder. All 7 wolves flinched. Their paddling quickened, frantic for a moment, splashing water against my boat. The first wolf pressed closer, its body shaking violently. They weren't predators closing in on prey. They were animals fleeing for their lives. I turned toward the shoreline, but the fog was too thick to see anything beyond a vague, dark line of trees. Another distant impact sounded, metallic, heavy, followed by a faint yell I couldn't fully make out. My throat tightened as a second gunshot shattered the air. The wolves weren't hunting. They were hiding. I gripped the paddle, not in fear now, but in disbelief, watching the desperate animals cling to the only refuge they could find in the middle of the lake, my tiny boat. Whatever they were running from was still out there, and getting closer. The moment the second gunshot faded, the lake seemed to contract around me. The wolves clung to the side of the boat, trembling, water streaming off their soaked fur. I steadied myself on the bench, breathing hard, trying to understand how a calm morning had turned into this. But the signs had been there. I just hadn't understood them. Yesterday afternoon, when the air was dry and the forest still, I wandered deeper into the woods looking for a new fishing spot. I remembered the unease settling in my chest when I found the first set of tracks, deep tire ruts pressed into the soft soil. Not from a ranger vehicle, not from a camper. These were from a heavy quad or modified off-road machine. The tread marks cut straight across a section of protected land where no vehicles were allowed. I followed them for a few meters before something else caught my eye. One of the snares left half buried under leaves, its wire bent and snapped. A second one lay several feet away, crushed like something big had stepped through it. The forest floor around them was torn up, as if panicked animals had tried to break free. And then I saw the carcass, or what was left of it. An elk, large, mature, stripped open, ribs exposed, parts missing. The kill was fresh. Ravens scattered when I approached. Something about it felt wrong. Not the kill itself, that was nature, but the debris around it. Broken twigs, a torn glove, the corner of a plastic bag, a cheap lighter. None of it belonged to the forest. That's when I called Carter. His voice had come through tired, strained, the way it always did when he'd been dealing with too many problems at once. I told him about the tracks, the snares, the elk. He didn't sound surprised. Instead, he warned me that there had been signs of illegal trapping recently. People setting lines far into the backcountry and checking them at night. Be careful, Mark. If you see anything else, call me again. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, watching the wolves cling to my boat while gunshots echoed from the treeline, I realized he hadn't told me everything. A splash drew my attention back to the present. One of the wolves tried to paddle closer and turned, revealing a dark patch on its flank. I leaned forward. Not a patch, an injury. Small punctures scattered across the skin beneath wet fur. I reached out slowly, not touching it, just observing. Tiny cuts, some shallow, others bleeding lightly. The kind of marks caused by shrapnel or fragments from a snapped trap. Another wolf shifted, rolling sideways for a moment. More marks. My stomach tightened. These animals had pushed themselves across the lake while wounded. Whatever drove them into the water wasn't just frightening. It had been close, violent, and human. A third gunshot cracked through the fog, much closer than before. The echo hit the water hard, sending ripples toward the boat. The wolves flinched as one, their paws splashing frantically for several seconds before they settled again. I tightened my grip on the paddle. Staying in the middle of the lake wasn't an option anymore. Whoever was firing was moving, and judging by the direction of the sound, they were following the shoreline. I turned the boat toward land. The wolves didn't resist. They drifted along with me, keeping close. I didn't know what waited on the bank. I didn't know how many people were out there. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had chased these wolves into the water was still out there, and I needed to find out why. As the boat's hull scraped against the muddy shoreline, a heavy stillness settled over the trees. The wolves hovered near me, their bodies forming a loose circle, as if none of them wanted to be the first to step onto land. I tightened my grip on the paddle and scanned the bank before climbing out. The mud held fresh, deep impressions, tracks from a large off-road truck or a lifted 4x4. The tread marks were wide, heavy, and cut sharply into the earth, meaning the vehicle had passed through recently and at speed. They pointed toward a narrow trail disappearing into the undergrowth. My chest tightened. Whoever had fired those shots wasn't far. Behind me, the wolves finally began to leave the water. They moved more cautiously on land than I expected, heads low, shoulders brushing against each other, forming a tight, defensive formation. They kept glancing toward the path as if expecting something to burst out of it. I crouched behind a fallen spruce trunk, its bark damp and soft from the rain. From there, I could see both the trail and a wide patch of flattened grass where the truck must have skidded or turned around. The ground was littered with scraps, broken branches, a snapped piece of wire, a fragment of a metal clamp. Leftovers from traps. Voices rose from deeper in the woods. Two men emerged a moment later, stomping through the undergrowth with rifles slung over their shoulders. One was tall and broad, the other shorter with a sharp, impatient stride. They didn't bother whispering. The tall one kicked at the mud and growled. "We should have taken them all yesterday. They're tearing through everything." The shorter man snapped back. "Because you rushed the line. Half the traps weren't set right." The tall man gestured angrily at the forest. "Those wolves cost us a week of work, and we're not leaving until we finish this. Every last one of them." My stomach tightened. So it was true. The pack had broken through their traps, and the men wanted revenge, not resources. The shorter man pointed toward the lake. "They can't have gone far. If any survived, they'll be bleeding out somewhere." He kicked a piece of wire in frustration. "I'm not letting them ruin another season." Their casual cruelty churned something in me. These wolves weren't dangerous monsters. They were survivors that had clawed their way out of a line of metal and pain. Then the tall man's voice dropped. "Check the shoreline. If someone saw anything." He stopped mid-sentence. He was staring at my boat. The shorter man followed his gaze. His posture stiffened, and he lifted his rifle a few inches, scanning the bank. "Someone's here," he muttered. "Boat's fresh. Still wet." My heartbeat thudded painfully against my ribs. The tall man stepped forward, peering along the waterline. "Find them. Whoever helped those wolves." His voice turned hard. "They'll wish they hadn't." He headed directly toward my position. I pressed myself flat behind the fallen trunk, mud cold against my palms. The wolves behind me froze, ears pinned, silent but alert. They weren't running, and I suddenly understood, neither could I. The moment the tall man stepped toward the shoreline, instinct took over. My pulse jolted, sharp and electric, and I slid back from the fallen trunk, signaling to the wolves with a small motion I wasn't even sure they'd understand. But they moved instantly, silent, fluid, slipping into the trees with a coordination that felt practiced, almost rehearsed. It was as if they had been waiting for me to choose a direction. I followed them, my breath tight in my chest. Branches whipped against my arms as I pushed deeper into the forest. Rainwater clung to everything: leaves, bark, my clothes, turning the world into a slick maze of shadows and movement. The ground was uneven and soft from the storm, and every footstep felt too loud, like I was betraying my own position with every crunch of twigs beneath my boots. Behind us, the men shouted, a series of clipped, sharp instructions, the kind spoken by people used to being obeyed. Their voices echoed between the trunks, bouncing in ways that made it impossible to tell exactly how close they were. The wolves formed a staggered line ahead of me, their bodies weaving effortlessly between the trees. They weren't sprinting, they were choosing paths with purpose, slipping through sections of thin undergrowth and firmer ground where I could keep up without stumbling too often. They knew this forest far better than I ever could. I dug my phone out of my pocket as I ran. My breath came in short, burning pulls. One tiny bar of service flickered into existence, then faded, then blinked back again like a dying flame. I tapped Carter's number with a trembling thumb. The ring broke apart into static. Come on, come on. The call dropped. The bar vanished. A crack of branches behind us made me whip my head around. A man yelled something indistinct but furious. They were closing the distance. Adrenaline surged through me as I pushed harder, boots slipping on slick moss and mud. The wolves slowed whenever I lagged, keeping me within the loose line they'd created. They weren't guiding me, not exactly, but they weren't letting me fall behind either. They moved with a strange collective awareness, as if my survival had become stitched into theirs. We pushed through a thicket, and suddenly the forest floor changed beneath my feet. The air turned heavier, wetter, carrying the unmistakable scent of stagnant water. A bog. My stomach tightened. Bogs in weather like this were unpredictable. Soil that looked solid might swallow a person whole. The trees stood farther apart here, their roots twisting like ropes above the dark earth. The old wolf, gray-muzzled, broad-shouldered, and moving with a limp I hadn't noticed earlier, stepped ahead of the others. It paused, sniffed the air, then turned sharply left, placing its paws on a narrow ridge of firmer soil. I followed, carefully placing my boots where its paws landed. The ground squished beneath each step, but held. Halfway across, my luck snapped. My right leg plunged into cold muck up to the knee. The sound, a wet, sucking pull, felt like something alive had latched onto me. Panic exploded through my chest. I grabbed at a low-hanging branch, fingers slipping along the wet bark. For a terrifying second, I felt my body sinking deeper. Then the old wolf turned. It huffed, a short, sharp sound that cut through my panic, and stepped closer, placing its weight with deliberate precision on a patch of firm ground near the ridge. Its eyes locked onto mine, steady and demanding focus. I braced myself and pulled hard. The branch held. Inch by inch, I dragged my leg free, stumbling back onto the ridge just as the bog bubbled where I'd been trapped. My heart hammered wildly. I nodded once to the wolf, an instinctive gesture of thanks I didn't fully understand. The wolf blinked slowly, then turned back toward the trees. Together, we moved on. Behind us, shouting tore through the forest. The men had reached the edge of the bog. One of them cursed loudly as the ground shifted beneath his feet. A grim sense of urgency pushed me forward, ignoring the burning in my calves and the ache in my soaked boots. The forest thinned again, opening into a pocket of clearer ground. Through the break in the trees, a weathered hunting platform rose on 4 wooden posts. Its planks were warped and gray, the ladder rusted and crooked, but it was high enough to offer a vantage point. And maybe a signal. The wolves gathered beneath the structure, circling the base with restless steps, ears swiveling toward the voices behind us. I reached the ladder, grabbed the cold metal rung, and climbed quickly, my hands trembling with fatigue. At the top, the air felt different, lighter, cooler. I pulled out my phone with shaky fingers. One bar flickered. I raised it higher. The bar steadied. A long, shaky breath escaped me as I pressed call. Please, Carter, pick up. I don't think we have much time. The line crackled in my ear, a fragile thread of sound that felt like it could snap at any second. For a moment, I thought the call had failed completely, until Carter's voice pushed through the static, strained, urgent, but unmistakably alive. "Mark? Talk to me. Where are you?" I crouched lower on the platform, shoulders tight, one hand wrapped so hard around the railing that my knuckles ached. The air felt heavy, thick with the cold damp drifting from the surrounding pines. North side of the lake, old hunting post, 2 men, armed. They're tracking the wolves. The connection flickered, the words warping and thinning as if the forest itself were swallowing them. I pressed the phone against my ear until it hurt. "Stay hidden. I'm." Static swallowed the rest. Then, nothing. But it was enough. He knew where to find me. Below, the wolves shifted subtly, tightening their ring at the base of the post. Their bodies formed a living barrier, silent, alert, unified. They weren't frantic anymore. They were waiting, listening. Every ear turned toward the direction we had come from. The old wolf, scarred and gray-muzzled, stood closest to the ladder, breathing slow and steady, eyes fixed on the trees. A sudden crack of branches snapped the air. I froze, lowering myself just enough to peer through the gaps in the warped wooden railing. The shorter man appeared first, forcing his way through the undergrowth, brushing aside branches with the barrel of his rifle. The tall one followed, broad-shouldered, panting, muttering curses under his breath as he scanned the clearing. They swept their rifles from one side of the clearing to the other. "Tracks fresh." The shorter man pointed toward the ground beneath the post, mud pressed down by my boots. My heartbeat stumbled in my chest. They didn't see me yet, but they were close enough to feel it. Then, cutting through the thick hush of the forest, came the roar of an engine. Both men turned sharply. A truck burst into the clearing, tires slipping on the wet earth before jerking to a halt. The door flung open before the engine even settled. "Carter." He stepped out with purposeful speed, one hand on his holster, the other raised as he barked something across the clearing. I couldn't hear every word, but his tone carried clear authority, the kind that froze people mid-breath. The tall man raised his rifle a few inches. Carter already had his weapon drawn, stance steady, ready. "Drop it. Now." Time didn't just pause, it stretched. Even the wolves below me became statues. The tall man hesitated, jaw tight, eyes darting. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. The shorter man dropped his weapon with a metallic thud, glancing nervously at the tree line, as if weighing an escape he knew wouldn't succeed. A second vehicle arrived moments later, a county deputy cruiser, followed by another ranger truck. Officers stepped out with practiced precision, securing the area, cuffing the men, gathering their discarded rifles. The forest, taut with fear for so long, exhaled. My knees nearly gave out as I climbed down the ladder. When my boots reached the ground, the wolves didn't retreat. They remained exactly where they had been, watching me. The old wolf stepped forward. Its approach wasn't cautious or aggressive. It was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Rain clung to its fur, sliding down in thin rivulets. Up close, I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The age-softened fur around its eyes, the faint tremor of fatigue in its limbs, the resolve in the way it held its head. It stopped only a few feet away. The world narrowed to its steady gaze. No fear, no threat, just acknowledgment. Time swelled around us. I barely heard the officers speaking behind me or the rustle of evidence bags or Carter giving instructions. All I felt was the quiet certainty that this animal understood what had happened, that somehow we had faced the same danger together. The wolf blinked once, slow and sure. Then it turned, stepping back toward the shelter of the trees. The rest of the pack fell into formation behind it, moving with silent grace until their shapes dissolved into the forest's deep greens and shadows. Carter came to stand beside me, letting out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for miles. "I've been doing this 20 years, he murmured. Never seen wolves stand like that with a man nearby. I didn't answer. Words felt too small, too fragile for the weight of what I had just witnessed. Hours blurred together as officers finished their reports, secured the traps, and escorted the arrested men back toward the road. The clearing slowly emptied, leaving behind only trampled grass, fading tire tracks, and the soft hush of wind through the pines. When everything finally quieted, I made my way back toward the lake. The water was calm again, tinted silver by the thinning clouds. My boat lay where I had dragged it ashore, resting gently in the shallows. But beside it, pressed into the wet sand, was something that pulled me to a stop. A wolf print. Fresh, clean, delicate enough to disappear with the next breeze, yet unmistakably intentional. I crouched, hovering my hand above it, feeling the echo of the moment settle into my chest. Not a coincidence, not an accident. A thank you. A breeze drifted across the lake, carrying the scent of pine and the distant murmur of birds returning to their perches. I let out a slow breath. Sometimes, I whispered, the wilderness remembers kindness. And for the first time that day, the forest felt gentle again. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.